pitch. All right. How is everyone feeling about your upcoming job search?
Cautiously optimistic. I think that's the phrase.
I do love that phrase, cautiously optimistic. I use it all the time. That's fantastic. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense as we start getting things ready. Hopefully today we can clarify a few things around your personal pitch, answering that question, tell me about yourself, and touch on everything from networking to interviews and, the job search across the board. Are there any specific questions or things that are on your mind that you want to make sure we cover today? Anyone have some specific things that they want to dig into? Topics around the job search?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Obviously, there's a lot of jobs out there that are advertising for hiring and everything. But I'm
Mhm.
curious, what are some of like the big red flags to sort of look for?
Mm. And when you
You
say
know,
red flags, do you just mean like scams or do you mean bad companies to
well,
look
not
for?
I guess not. Well, yeah, okay. So sure, scams. I didn't even realize that was a potential red flag. So
Yeah.
yeah, sure, scams. If that's a prevalent thing, but more so, so I'm kind of new to tech in general. This will be the first time I'm kind of trying to get a job in the industry, and maybe someone who has been in this industry longer knows what a company they want to work for looks like based on their job posting,
Got
whereas
it.
I might not. So
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is the the one of the reasons we're going to talk about our pitch here is because job boards are they're an inefficient way to do the job search, and most of what is posted in job descriptions is idealistic and not realistic. And so they're incredibly demoralizing and incredibly I don't know. They're tough. People will spend a year on a job board to avoid networking, and that's just not the place that we want to be. And so, things to watch out for: if they say 3 years experience, what do they really mean? Usually, that's more of a pie shot. Um, but there's a lot of things that we'll touch on throughout the conversation today around red flags. So, primarily, it's around their attempts to kind of, what's the way I want to phrase it? Companies tend to get a little bit of a big head about how great they are, and their job when they're talking to us is to sell us on the company, and our job is to sell them on us. And so all of that is to say, when we really should be getting hypercritical is after the offer. So a lot of times when I'm talking to folks, they tend to get a little ahead of themselves and they're over analyzing a job description or a company or an opportunity because they want to make sure they're applying for the right things. And I'm much more of the other mindset. I say go after everything with gusto and then be really critical once they offer it to you. And so this is maybe not what normally a career coach would say, but basically you want every job and every opportunity until they give it to you. And then once you have it in hand, you go, what is this? This isn't good. But even if they give you a bad offer, you've been able to practice interviewing. You've been able to practice following up. You've been able to practice telling your stories in a professional context, dealing with anxiety and stress. So there's so much benefit from going through a process and getting a bad offer, even if we get a bad offer. And so I think the red flags typically happen during the negotiation stage. And that's something we can definitely touch on, salary negotiation or benefits and things like that. Any other topics that folks want to touch on today? I'm seeing the wheels turning, but we can jump into the presentation if not.
Yeah, not at the moment. Maybe as the discussion goes on, something
Cool.
might come up.
Totally. Well, before we jump in, I'll tell you who I am and why I'm even talking here. So my name is Martin McGovern, and I run a company called Career Therapy. And I started out my career in the marketing world and spent a lot of time learning how to apply behavioral psychology and all these different influencing techniques, manipulation techniques, whatever you want to call them, to get people to buy products. So in marketing and advertising, the whole thing was, how do you increase engagement? How do you get people to act? How do you get people to open an email or listen to you? All these great tactics that are really important to learn. And I started outside of work helping people with their personal brands. And these personal brands, which came out of these networking events that I was running, ended up getting people jobs. So they would learn how to tell their story, learn how to sell themselves, learn how to connect with people. And that led to job opportunities or starting small businesses or any number of different outcomes. And throughout the process of doing that, I got involved with some education organizations, met some folks over at themuse.com, if you've seen that website with its great careers content, and slowly turned it from a marketer into a career coach over a few year period. And now basically what I do is I take a lot of those same tactics, mix in a nice bit of professional development training that I've learned over the years, and I reverse engineer marketing so that you can get money back from companies. They're so good at manipulating you. Why not learn the same skills, turn it around, and get some of that money back into your pocket and some great jobs under your belt? So those are the types of things that that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. This very marketing yourself for the right career that you want, telling your story in a really succinct and clear way so that companies care. And one of the big things we're going to talk about today is what's in it for me with them. It's this old marketing phrase from years and years ago where, no one's going to care about your product unless you sell it to them in a way that they care to hear about it. And so the same thing is with our job search. We'll talk about how people typically sell themselves after boot camp and why it causes issues. And we'll talk about what we can do to increase our odds and get better outcomes. So this is very conversational. I have some exercises in here. Feel free to interrupt me with questions in the chat or just unmute and ask your question. Feel free. And we'll jump into it here. I guess I should have pulled this up. So my name is Martin. I really enjoy working on the emotional and promotional sides of things. So if there's anything on the emotional side of the job search, one of the skills I've built over the years is being able to sit with someone who is having a very hard day and help them through it. And that shows up in a lot of different ways. And I've worked at many different boot camps and organizations over the years. So here's what we're going to be covering at a high level. We're going to be talking about the words that you use and the impact that they have in the way you see yourself as a developer and how it shapes how other people see you. We're going to look at the stories that you tell. Stories are the way that we compel people to take action. And so, something like tell me about a strength and a weakness, if we just tell them procrastination, it's a pretty weak answer. But if we give an actual story of a weakness and explain how it impacts our work and why it's relevant to the person we're talking to, it's a totally different approach. And then we're going to end with your pitch. We're going to actually do some exercises to write out a very short form version of your pitch, almost as stripped down as I could possibly make it for you, which you can then utilize on different platforms and in conversation, and you can mold to whatever interaction you're about to have. All right. And so starting off, we're going to look at your words. So who are we actually talking to? When you actually get out there and start this job search, who is it that you're going to be talking to? Who do you think you're going to come across?
Hiring managers or recruiters.
Hiring managers and recruiters. Anyone else?
If it's a smaller company, it could be the owner.
Owners, yeah, absolutely.
Or CEO.
CEO, COO, CTO, yep. all the C-level folks.
The manager of whatever department we're applying to.
Department managers. I love it. Yeah, you're hitting it right on the head. So recruiters, hiring managers, all these different folks. And they want to hear from you. They really do. All these companies have problems. That's why they put up a job listing. That's why they're willing to talk to you. As a matter of fact, even if they don't have anything listed, they have problems because there's no such thing as a company that doesn't have a problem because they're either restricted by money, by time, by resources, by market demands, etc. Right? COVID hit and all of a sudden half the world's industries are unable to even do their work and the other half is scrambling to increase their capabilities because now all of a sudden Zoom is on everyone's computer instead of just a certain type of professional, right? And so all of a sudden companies like Zoom are saying, how do we create education products and break into new industries that help, middle schoolers? I watched a video this morning of a bunch of middle schoolers who were on a Zoom call and grade schoolers, probably even younger. And the teacher fell off the call. And then the kids proceeded to talk about how the call's being recorded and they can't get into any trouble because they can't do anything that's bad because the teacher might watch it later or the principal, and then they'll be toast. And then they went into a whole rant about how they all wanted to have toast the next day for breakfast. It was hilarious. But this is the world we're in, right? We're in a new world. We've got new problems. And every single one of these companies wants to hear how you solve problems. They don't want to hear how you have problems. And that's unfortunately how most people do their job search. They say, I'm unemployed. Can you employ me? I would really like to pay my rent and be fed. And I need your company to do that for me. And I also need you to mentor me and hopefully give me some great vacation days and some other things that I could really use. And the company's sitting there going, well, where's our ROI? And we really do need to think about our ROI, or at least the problems that we solve, in order to be compelling in these situations. And that brings us to how should we speak to these folks, right? So typically, what do you think folks are saying when they graduate a boot camp? I kind of threw out a few things there, but what if I were to just say, tell me about yourself, what immediately pops to mind?
I'd say a classic one for me is that I'm learning to be a software engineer.
That's a good one. Anyone else?
More or less the same. Like I just learned a whole bunch of new skills and I'm looking for a new place to like use them in the field.
Yeah. Looking for a place to put them into practice, right? This learning one, it's good and it's true. And I want to emphasize, when I'm telling you to stop saying certain things in this presentation, it's not because those things aren't true, but they're just leaving out the other half of the truth. So when we say I'm learning, we leave out the fact that in order to learn properly, we have to solve real world problems, right? In order to actually get to the point that we feel like we're going to be senior or, whatever level we want to get to, we actually have to work on some real problems. So the only way for us to learn is to help real companies solve real problems. And that's what they want to hear. They want to hear the part that has to do with them, not the part that has to do with our personal growth. Because it's assumed if you're in a job, you're learning. As a matter of fact, at any level, you're learning. I'm learning in this call, right? I'm learning in every single interaction that I have with someone. I'm asking questions. I'm adjusting as I go. And so, yes, to your point, when we speak to people, we need to speak with a them first, not a me first perspective. You're here to solve their problems, not the other way around. Now, how does this typically show up in your job search? Does anyone know where the most me first language shows up in a job search? Where do you think it is?
The start of a paragraph.
Start of a paragraph, but where is that paragraph at?
Or like in the cover letter?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You should read, most templates have this if you just Google cover letter templates, first of all, they're all written as though we're still living in the time of 1987 with fax machines and letter writing. Like we're gonna say to whom this may concern, like anyone ever says that ever in real life. And they're written in these long, drawn out, like overly pretentious ways that totally miss the point, which is why are we writing this cover letter? Hopefully to get their interest, right? But if we say to whom it may concern, already no one on this call wants to read that letter, right? Yeah. So the way that we talk is really important. And then you look at the cover letter, and almost every cover letter I get from someone starts with, it typically starts with, I'm really interested in this role. And they like clearly detail the role. And there's a little bit of debate on whether or not you should say that. I think that made sense when we were putting these in envelopes and sending them to people, because it would show up and they would say, what job listing is this for? Right? Because the job listing might have been posted in a newspaper and not tied to this letter that randomly showed up, unless you put the clipping from the newspaper in the envelope or something. But today, every application we submit is assigned to that CRM system, that applicant tracker system, right? So they pretty much know what you've applied for. So we don't really need to restate it in our cover letter. And then the cover letter will proceed to say, my name, me, every single, I actually got one from someone, every single sentence started with I. It was incredible. I was like, this is amazing that you were able to do this. I feel like it would be hard to do if I tried to. And so we have to look at that and say, if you were to go on a date with someone and they spent the whole date just saying, I like this and I like that and I do this and I do that, and they never once ask you about you, you're going to leave that date feeling pretty like, oh, I don't want to see that person again, right? So that's why we reverse it. So we always want to be them first rather than me first. So I always encourage people to start their cover letters saying, here's what your company does that's really interesting, and then back it up with what you do. Or when you're writing an email to someone, we say, here's what you're doing that's interesting, and I'd be curious to chat more over coffee, rather than here's what I do. And I've actually seen this email sent out. Here's my entire life story. I really want a job at your company. Here's my resume. Let me know if you have any questions. I read that and I was like, what questions would they ever have for you? Because I'm your career coach and I don't want to read your resume. Like, what are they going to do? Read your resume and have some profound questions that come out of it? I just don't see it happening. So the quicker we can shift to a them first mindset, the better. And that's, it's a very kind of helpful perspective. I'm here to help. I'm here to solve problems. I have my skills and I want to get paid well, but I'm here to help primarily. And the work that you're going to put me on is going to increase conversions. It's going to get more sales. It's going to decrease inefficiencies. It's going to improve the sales process. Whatever the thing is that we're solving for, they're going to get an ROI on the money they give us. And then we'll be able to get away from what we're currently saying, which, as you've already called out, is I'm here to learn. Or what we hear most often is, hi, I recently graduated and I'm excited for the opportunity to learn in this role. What happens? What do you think they hear when they hear someone say this? What goes through the hiring manager, the recruiter, or the CEO's mind?
No experience.
You hit the nail on the head. I'm inexperienced, unemployed, and I need you to teach me. Hi, I'm inexperienced.
It's a very relatable little doggy there. I feel that.
Right? And so that's what we're trying to fix today. That's the mindset shift that I'm hoping you leave here today, is to just stop focusing on yourself. First of all, it takes the pressure off. How many of us want to be a personal brand that everyone is staring at all the time? The answer is surprisingly low. So what we want to do is shift it back to them as much as possible, so we don't have to talk about ourselves. We don't have to brag about ourselves. We can just say, oh, that's your problem? I would solve it this way. Do you want to get started on that? Here's my rate. Great. Now let's move forward with life, right? Very simple conversations. All right. So now that we know what they don't want to hear, hit me with some of your ideas of what they might want to hear instead.
I'll work for free with no health benefits.
No, Nisarg, don't do that.
Don't say that.
Don't do that.
Well, that's what they want to hear, right?
Is it though? Let's analyze it. Let's talk as a group. I'd love to hear everyone's opinions on that.
I mean, it really depends on the company. I am sure you can find a lot of companies that 100% want you to do that and preferably also work like 100 hours. But I think you also have a whole lot of like companies that actually know what's going on. They want like the best for the employees because they also know if they have happy employees, they will have like a higher ROI on like what they're doing.
There's that. That's 100% true. I appreciate you sharing that. There's also high turnover. Companies don't want to hire people who are going to leave, right? So if a company hires you and pays you $1 an hour, well, you're going to quit as soon as someone pays you $2. So they want to give fair rates to a degree. Obviously, there's negotiations to be had, but they want to get people at the right level, at the right pay that is competitive, but not going to bankrupt them, so that they can actually retain you for more than 6 months, because that transition cost is incredibly high. It costs about $4,000 per person they interview to do a job hunt. So whenever we're talking to a company and we think about the number of hours the employees spend actually on the phone with you, all the emails back and forth, all the different stuff that's going on, a lot of times people will be like, that company ghosted me. I put in all this effort and they didn't do anything. I'm like, they spent $4,000 talking to you. So that's an honor. I mean, we can look at it that way, or we can try to. It's hard in the moment, but what other things do you think they want to hear?
How we can help them.
All right. So what are some of the things that you've learned in class that you think would benefit a company and their bottom line?
Help them with their data analytics so they can create better reports, that they can actually have real-time data on how to move forward with their company based on like, I don't know, like whatever happens in the market or whatever like KPIs they have. That's
amazing. And so 2 ways to talk about that in a networking conversation or an interview, right? One way is to say, here's what I do. I did a data analysis and a repo and a blah, 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 and I do all these great things. Another thing is, what are you guys currently doing with your data? How are you currently collecting it? How are you currently analyzing it? How are you presenting it to C-level employee, to the C-suite? How are you managing it and utilizing it in your decision-making process? Oh boy, we really don't do a good job of that. We're really good at collecting it, but once we have it, we really don't know what to do with it. Oh, well, I did this one project where I was actually putting together really great visualizations of data. If that's something that you're interested in, I'd love to talk more about it. Now you're collaborating on a problem. Even though you haven't been hired, you're still helping them. And you're having them think critically about their business rather than analyzing you as an individual. And it's way better to be, you know, in the chair facing the computer with them than at odds against each other, which is, you know, unfortunately how all interviews are set up. Anyone have any other thoughts on what they want to hear? All right.
I mean, maybe a little bit about eventually a little bit about yourself, because like that you need to be a good fit for like either the team or the company, or like just be part of the culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they want to know about those things in relation to their team and their company. So a big one here, and this is why I put that with them. What's in it for me? There's actually 3 I's, I guess. Got to work on my acronyms, but whatever. This is an old phrase. And there's this this interesting thing that happens when we start talking about ourselves in the job search, is that we tend to either talk about our insecurities and talk about all these very personal things that people don't care about, or we forget to relate what we're talking about to their needs. And so something about yourself, right? So why do you want to be a developer, right? Who has an answer for that?
I know I want to be a developer, and I have a continued interest in coding because I really enjoy puzzle solving and logical thinking, and coding and developing is a active it's an active employable skill that incorporates all of the elements of logical thinking and problem solving and puzzles that I really enjoy as hobbies.
That's amazing. That's absolutely accurate and on point and true. Does a company want to hear that?
Yes.
I'm going to sell you my coaching services right now. All right. You should work with me as a coach because I really love talking to people. And it really makes me feel good to get coffee in my hand, a little tea or whatnot, and talk with people. And the more people that hire me as a coach, the more I get to talk with people. It's really great. It's pretty fun. Do you want to work with me?
Okay, I see what you did there.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You're like, is talking to you going to get me a goddamn job? Right?
No. So I guess, would a way to improve what I was saying to talk about that those are things that I'm good at and why, or that's what makes me good at coding is that
Yes.
I like those and I'm inclined at those. Therefore, I'm good at coding and will be a valuable asset for you.
Exactly. So the self-awareness piece is that you love puzzles. You love problem solving. As a matter of fact, I haven't met a developer who doesn't. And if you're a developer who doesn't, you're probably going to be a bad developer. So there's this core understanding that you enjoy problem solving, technology, or whatever the thing is that drew you into development in the first place. And then you need to direct it towards something. What is your point of view when it comes to development, right? So why do I enjoy coaching? I personally enjoy it because I get to use all these tactics that companies use to make you drink more, spend more, and be less healthy to make more, do more, and build a life you want. Rather than being sold to, I teach people how to sell themselves and be able to do more of what they want to do. And so I get to use that same fun skill set towards an outcome. And that is the point of view I have, which is if you can learn how to reverse engineer marketing for your own benefit, you become unstoppable in your career. And because I am able to sell it that way, I'm also able to get coffee with people and talk a whole lot. Like that's wonderful and stressful and a whole lot of other things. But when it comes to development, you enjoy puzzles and problem solving. Why? What does solving problems through coding allow you to do for a company or the world? Well, the world gets a little bit big, so let's just focus on a company. So what are your favorite coding problems and puzzles to solve?
I almost feel like those are two different questions.
Okay.
Right?
Let's break them
because
down.
When I'm thinking about it, some of my favorite coding that I've done and are literally just little random puzzles that are often mathematical or some manipulation of strings that in its implementation is really clever in its use of the language and its use of math, or the way that you're manipulating things is not obvious. It's just like something that's cool and clever.
Nice.
But in practice, that's absolutely useless because they don't actually really do anything a lot of the time. It's just like, oh, wow, you can do that with the language. So while oftentimes like my favorite coding things or stuff like that, there is also the side of my recognition of I also really enjoy coding solutions that have great practical uses. So if I can take something that a company does and automate it so that it's either, you know, it makes, so like I'm building a CRM style application right now that will be able to automatically track attendance for a team. And in addition to that, eventually I'm hoping to be able to pull in a bunch of data analytics to give each team member a little to-do list of here's what you can do better next time, based off of historical data. Those are like cool coding solutions that are very beneficial, where you're taking any sort of human process and making it easier to understand and require less time.
That's exactly what we're getting at. The way that you phrase that, I love to take these things that companies are trying to do and automate them. That is a huge benefit for companies. And the fact that you gave an example, I think, is that storytelling piece. That is the next step in that. So you identify something that you do that benefits a company. So I automate. Then you say an example of how you automate. I can track attendance for folks, or I'm building an app that will track attendance. Immediately I hear that as a career coach and I go, oh, I had to do attendance on 2 calls today. And it was exhausting trying to start the call and take attendance at the same time. And Zoom took away that feature of being able to export attendance. Because of security concerns, all sorts of stuff, right? And so immediately you have an upper hand in the conversation that you didn't have before, because I'm in my head thinking, what things could I have this person automate? Rather than, is this person someone I want to work with? I'm already on the next step of what can I have them work on? And that's exactly on point. And then the puzzle solving piece is good for self-awareness, because you know that one of the reasons you're in this field is because every once in a while you get tossed a real puzzle, something that'll really scratch your brain in the right way. And that's just a great thing to keep you centered and moving in the same direction in your career, so you're not going off on all these different tangents. So I know that personally, I think emotional well-being and having a good personal story is something that everyone should have for their own mental health, but also I can apply that to career coaching and a bunch of other things, primarily career coaching. And the way I want to think about this that maybe is a little more fun, comedians love the technical craft of writing a joke, but they don't tell that to their audience when they're on stage. They make the joke look effortless, like they had just come up with it on the spot, right? Because their goal on stage is to make someone laugh, and explaining how they wrote the joke is the best way to get someone to not laugh at your joke. And so these are the things that it's like, we almost have to split it. It's like, we know who we are, why we do what we do, and all of that's really important. But that's not what's going to sell us in the job search. What's going to sell us in the job search is the output of that personal interest. And I think a good way to think about this is Nike doesn't come to you and say, hey, our shareholders want to make more money, so we made a new shoe. Will you buy it? They say, do your knees hurt as you get older? And you go, yeah. We made a shoe that helps you so that your knees don't hurt so much as you continue to put more miles on your body. Oh, that would be really helpful. All right, buy our shoe. Right? They're not going to sell you on their shareholders. They're going to sell you on your needs. And then, of course, they're going to want to be the solution. And they're not always the solution, but they're going to try and fit themselves in there. And that's how we go from what do I do to what's in it for them. Any questions on that before we move forward? Anyone else want to give it a shot? No? Yes? It's hot in here. I'd take the sweater off. All right, next slide. So here's how we can phrase it instead. I heard you have big goals for your business. Here's how I can help you solve your problems and grow. So this requires a little bit of legwork. We have to figure out what problems their business has. We have to make sure we're the type of person that can solve them. And then we have to position ourselves to be able to do that. Does anyone have any other, so we have automation as one clear problem that you guys can solve. Are there any other, outputs of the work that you've been learning and doing that are really helpful for a business's bottom line that we can put into this little template here?
I think besides automation, insights in business, testing, just the whole experience of a platform, a website.
So let's stick with testing. What things do you need to test to improve a company, to improve a company's online presence?
Well, I would say it depends on what kind of, like the website, but let's say it's like a web shop or something. You can like improve basically like, well, everything that's there, like from the way how you can search for products on the website, or the way how your cart works, or the way even like a color of a button could be like something you could test. I don't know, like a picture, like basically you can name it all, basically.
Absolutely. So let's say we sit down for a networking conversation and we're talking to someone who works at a company that we really like. We can have a conversation about tech generally. We can have a conversation about their industry generally. And we want to be asking questions about how things might be changing. So I typically like to ask questions like, what are you most excited about? What things in your industry are you most excited about right now? What things are happening in your industry that you're most excited about right now? What are some of the things that you're struggling with in your job? What are some of the things you wish you could be working on? How do you feel technology is going to impact your business in the next few years? How has the pandemic changed things? Right? All of these questions, let them tell you what their problems are. And we can literally, in a number of conversations, write these all down, right? So I'll talk to 10 different people. One will complain about cover letters, one will complain about resumes, one will complain about networking, one will complain about interviews. Suddenly I've got a list of all the different things that I can help people with when it comes to the type of work I do. So for you, when you're out there networking, what's the point of networking? Is the point to get a job from every person we talk to? Well, that's a tall order. That's putting a lot of pressure on ourselves in every conversation. But the point could be to research and learn and gather information so that as we're going through these conversations and going into these interviews, we're the smartest person there. One of my favorite examples is someone really wanted to work in the Internet of Things. So they talked to a parts manufacturer, they talked to a appliance manufacturer, they talked to a bunch of the marketing and sales people at another company, and they talked to a couple of people on the legal team of like, what are the issues with like listening in on people's homes and all that kind of stuff. And then when they actually had an interview for a real job, they were like, well, last week I was talking to someone who is a parts manufacturer and they mentioned these things. And I think that that's really interesting because when it comes to, building an app for this or, improving the customer experience, we want to keep these things in mind. And they were just seen as way smarter than any of the other people that came through that interview because they got so many different perspectives and understood the problems of the industry that they were talking about. Now that brings up a question. Who here knows what industry you want to apply your skills to?
Nope.
Nope. Does anyone have a top 3? Or could you put together a top 3? That's a hand up, Sam? All right.
Yeah.
Let's shout them out or put them in the comments.
My top one is financial technology.
Fintech.
Yeah.
Why fintech?
So actually prior to this, I was in college and I had swapped my major around a couple times and spent a little while studying economics. And I love looking at, I had an internship at a currency trading fund. And I love, as I was talking before about like puzzles and patterns and all that kind of stuff, financial markets are fascinating for all those reasons. So it's fintech is like, it's an intersection of my interests,
Nice. So your
between the
self-awareness around puzzles and patterns has led you to pick both a career and an industry. That's huge. That's how you use your self-awareness in a practical sense in the job search. And when it comes to picking an industry, this is typically where people start to feel pigeonholed or locked in or worried. And one of the things that I do to help kind of break out of that is like fintech. You could take your favorite fintech company and put it in the center of a mind map, right? Where you have all these branches coming off. Look at all their competitors. Look at all their competitors' competitors. Look at all their competitors' competitors' competitors. And then look at all the partners on the other side, all the companies that they partner with. And you'll see that suddenly you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of companies to look at rather than just one. So when someone says, I want to work at Tesla, suddenly we're looking at solar panels. Suddenly we're looking at everything in the, sustainability marketplace. And one of my favorite examples of this was a developer I worked with. And she said that she was a crunchy granola person. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm crunchy granola. I'm like sustainability, nature bars and like hiking. That's my whole thing. So she literally positioned herself as like a coding hippie and got a job in like a Patagonia type company, right? Not Patagonia, but in that industry. And that's the goal, is to be surrounded by people who let you do the work that you want to do and are interested in the things that you're interested in. And that's usually a pretty prime place to be. And we can only do that if we allow ourselves the space to be specific, because we can always broaden out. But if we start wide, then we just get bombarded and we end up being very reactionary to LinkedIn, right? Today, LinkedIn told me to apply to these 5 jobs. I don't care about the industries or the companies, and I don't know anything about them. And there's really high competition because LinkedIn sent this to everyone. But that's the reactionary approach that I'm taking. So we'll see how long I can do this before I drive myself insane. And instead, we can go, I know I want to work in fintech. Here are the 550 fintech companies and all their subsidiaries and everything like that. One of them's going to hire me. If I go talk to 10 people at every company, one of them has a problem that I can help solve, even if it's a contract. And that's pretty true, right? When I picked boot camps as my niche, it's a pretty small niche. There's like maybe 150 that could even hire me, but I seem to build a career on it. And then you can build outward from there. And so these are the types of things that we can do to really get focused. And even though boot camps is my niche, ed tech is the bigger niche, education is the bigger niche, and whatever is beyond that, I'm not quite sure. But let's take a moment. I'd love for you to all throw in the chat what your 1 to 3 favorite industries would be. And if you're having trouble, just Google LinkedIn industry codes and it'll give you the back-end link that shows you how they force companies to categorize. And it has maybe about 150 different industries on that list that you could choose from. And again, this isn't to pigeonhole you, it's to give you a starting point, because then you can say, well, what are the common problems that fintech companies have? Security, most likely. What are the common problems that education companies have? Outdated technology or cumbersome systems. What are the common things that legal firms deal with? Usually it's outdated technology or everything is very manual and they spend a lot of time inputting data and inputting reports. What are the common problems that the music industry has? Well, it could be licensing and copyright tracking and things like that. We can kind of go down these lists and start thinking about the common problems in these industries and then start positioning our pitches around their needs. I know that almost every single education organization that I work with has a difficult time scaling career services. So that's one of the many things that I talk about when I'm talking with folks in this industry, because it's very heavily human based. It's not tech. So restaurant and service companies. So restaurants are all dealing with home delivery right now and trying to fulfill orders online. And most restaurants don't have good websites because they relied on other websites to do their work for them. And a lot of them are trying to do like, you know, at home, like wine and cheese tastings with a connection. There's this one, I have a friend who works in the food industry, and she just did a live stream where she was talking to these restaurateurs, and one of them was like, we started doing live wine tastings on Instagram, and people would buy the boxes of the charcuterie and the wines, and they'd have it sent to their house, and then they would tune in to the Instagram, and the Instagram was public to everyone. So people who weren't at home with the box would be jealous, and then they would go to the website and buy the box for the next night. And that was a way to increase sales by tying in the at-home delivery with the restaurant experience and kind of bring that restaurant experience into the home. And then they had to find a way to live stream music because they always had a pianist play in the restaurant. And so they found a way to hook up the piano to the live stream so that they could pipe that live music into your home while you're doing the tasting. So these are all things that a restaurant isn't a technology company. They're going to have a hard time doing that stuff and making it all work on their back end. So huge opportunities once we start looking at industry problems rather than wondering what companies will hire us. Does this help sort of clarify things, or does this start to, hit you in your, oh, this seems a little bit too focused or overwhelming?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. Can you tell me a little bit about the overwhelming feeling that you're having? Maybe we can break it down even simpler.
I just don't know how. I just don't feel qualified enough to get a job in an actual industry. So it's and especially now that I've applied to a couple places and I haven't heard back yet, it's like, oh shit, what the fuck am I gonna do? Feeling like kind of scared, kind of nervous.
100%. The nice thing about being developers is that you can literally work with anyone. So let's say you wanted to work in the restaurant industry. Go to the top, not even the top, just go to Instagram and look up food or home cooking or whatever, right? Find any of these people who are trying to build a brand around their home cooking and be known for being a baker or whatever, and reach out to them and say, hey, your Instagram is great, but I see that you don't have much of a website presence. Maybe their website stinks. I'd be happy to, partner up and work on your website and use it as a portfolio piece for myself during my job search, if that's something you're interested in. You get a free website, I get a portfolio piece. Would you be open to that? I actually was working with someone earlier today. She said, I have a favorite coffee shop and their website is garbage. So she wrote them an email on our call that said, let's make your website as good as your coffee. And she asked if they wanted to meet up for a chat. Now she's going to do that for free because she wants to prove to herself that she has the chops to build websites for a professional business, not just for herself. And then once she gets one under her belt, maybe a 2-3 page website, nothing fancy, then she can go to the next one and say, I do this for 20 an hour, then raise it to 25, then raise it to 30. Then now I have work experience. Now I'm going to leverage that for a full-time role. And that's how we can, if we're not feeling like we can jump from zero to working at Spotify, we can inch our way up that ladder. Does that make sense? So thanks everyone for sharing yours here. So if you're interested in political polling, are there any politicians that you respect whose websites are garbage? If you're interested in higher education, are there any schools that you like, or tutoring services, or individual tutors whose websites are garbage and maybe don't even have a buy button on them or have a very convoluted sales process on their website. If you're really interested in real estate, are there any realtors whose websites are terrible, or they're, maybe they're using their company website, but maybe there's independent realtors? Community development, environment. Are there any environmental organizations in your area that could use a refresh? This is how we go from I'm a job seeker who wants someone else to solve my unemployment problem to I am a developer who solves problems, and I'm really excited to partner with your company. Does that make sense? That's the big shift of what we're trying to get done here. We're trying to get away from the help me mindset and get into the I help you mindset. To go from the company up here and we're down here begging to peer to peer. I'm already doing these things, but I would happily put my projects aside to work for you. And so these are the types of questions that we want to be asking. What problems do they have? And what skills do I have? That's the equation. Companies have problems. We have skills. They pay us to use our skills to solve their problems. It's very straightforward. Hey, welcome to the call.
Hey, I'm sorry I was getting tutored.
No
Forgive
worries,
me.
Wesley. It's good to see you, man.
Yes.
We're just talking about perspectives, how to get out of the job seeker mindset and get into the I'm already a developer and now I want to develop things for you. So one of the biggest areas that we need to focus on is to stop looking at ourselves as someone who needs something from someone else and start looking at ourselves as a practitioner who's looking to collaborate with small businesses, large businesses, full-time, part-time, etc., until we've built something steady. Are there any questions around that perspective shift? Who here feels like a developer already? No hands are up. Oh my, a little bit. So what do you feel like you're missing?
I agree. Experience.
Experience? What was the other one?
So I was going to kind of dive into a little bit more specifics. I feel like there's plenty of, I had some coding experience before doing the bootcamp, and there are a lot of areas of, development that I feel pretty comfortable with, but I would say deployment and, actually taking something from just being like a project I'm working on to actually putting a finished product out like for people to use, and all the related deployment stuff like dealing with servers and like AWS stuff is stuff that I don't know. So I feel like I'm like partway to being a developer, but like until I actually like start deploying my projects, then like I haven't actually made anything yet. So
yeah. Is that typically what everyone's feeling? So it sounds like we need to prove to ourselves that we can put things live. Now, the problem with that is that we either have to build it ourselves or do it for someone else, right? And in order to convince someone to let us do it for them, we need to feel like we're confident enough to do it, right? We have to believe that we can do it before someone else will believe that we can do it. So we're in a catch-22, right? So it's almost to me like, if anyone, to use the analogy of working out, right? If you are learning how to work out, everything is fine and dandy until you go to a gym, right? You're just researching things online. You get to the gym and suddenly there's a ton of different machines. And to quote my favorite comedian, Brian Regan, he's like, you just get in and you start moving things. And they're like, sir, please get out of the scaffolding. And these are the things where we get nervous because we decided to try and learn how to move the scaffolding before we learned how to just do a push-up, right? Or before we executed the push-up. And so go build Wix websites for people. Go build Squarespace websites for people. Go build really, really basic deployed websites that you've deployed for people. Get experience putting live websites that are low risk, so that when you get to the really good one, the Amazon, integrated one, you've deployed other things, right? The first website I ever designed was for myself, and then I designed one for my family, my dad's business, and then I designed one for a nonprofit, and then I realized I hated making websites that weren't mine. So like these are the things that like we do and we learn, right? And so I would say like go just build a bunch of smaller scale websites while you're still learning AWS and you're still learning all the different things. And then when you get to the point where you're like, oh, well, deploying a small website isn't that bad. Now I can deploy a bigger one and then a bigger one, right? The first time I did coaching, I did it for free to people that I knew, but now it's a totally different ballgame years later, right? And so a few of the things that maybe help here is taking the pressure down a little bit and not trying to be perfect right out the gate. And then realizing, and this is a big one, I really want to discuss this with you, realizing that right now you're only comparing yourself to your fellow students and people who are higher up in their career than you are. One of my favorite cartoons back in the day was Rick and Morty. And the creator of Rick and Morty said, you never go home and watch people who make cartoons that are worse than what you can make. So you always feel like you can't make cartoons because you're watching expert level people who are more expert than you. What I'm going to encourage you all to do is go talk to tech idiots. Go put yourself in a room where you are the smartest person. Stop going to networking events that are all job seekers who just graduated a boot camp, and start going to networking events where it's a bunch of lawyers who all have crap websites, who don't know how to update Squarespace or have never even heard of it, and help them improve their business using their online presence. When you're the only person in the room with technical knowledge, you're going to feel a lot better about yourself. I can tell you that. Like, one of my favorite things when I broke into advertising was I thought these people were like madmen, right? They sit around and they get these amazing ideas that just pop into their head, and suddenly they've sold 10 million, units of ketchup. And then I went there and I was like, these people don't know how to use Instagram? What the hell? I was like, wow, I had a much higher view of all of you, and you don't even understand social media. Okay. You don't know what a hashtag is. Oh, okay. Never mind. Being young is good. Got it. And like, these are the things that I think are really fun to figure out. Like, the people who are doing the things are probably not as skilled, or at least they have imposter syndrome as well. And they're learning the next higher thing and the next higher thing. And there's a ton of people, myself included, who have no clue how to do what you do. And so if you can talk to a bunch of fitness trainers and help them get their websites up, and that's a real example. I was working with someone and he was trying to get a job. And I said, just reach out to some like Instagram fitness trainers, because they can't do any in-person training anymore. So they've all basically lost their jobs, and see if you can help them get their websites up. So he reached out to some bodybuilder lady. He said, hey, I'm, building my portfolio, looking to build some websites. I notice you don't have a website? And the woman wrote back, oh my God, yeah, I'm trying to become this lady. And she sent a link to this like influencer. She's like, I'm really trying to get to that level. And he goes, that's quite the level. That person has a whole e-commerce part of their website, like courses, like all sorts of different crazy stuff. And he goes, well, let's break it up into phases. Phase 1, we get you a basic site up with an about page and a services page. Phase 2, we can start incorporating some of the products that you sell. Phase 3, we could really go, to the wall with this stuff. And she goes, that's amazing. Here's my husband. He has a website he needs to get up. The husband introduced the guy to 4 more people. Now he's got 7 projects, and he's not looking for a full-time job. He's just going to build his own freelance business. So this is the level to which, like, it's pretty quick once you start saying, how do I help people rather than how do I impress people? Does that help get past that, like, I'm not a developer yet mindset?
To me, I've been trying to think about kind of a game plan of what actions to take, after this whole thing is done. And one of them was your suggestion is to do pro bono work. And to me, like that does take pressure off, because it's a, I'm doing it for free.
Yep.
So I'm providing a service. Obviously, I'll take it seriously as if I'm getting paid, but I think that helps a lot.
100%.
I'm also gonna, to me, like, because I've been, like, in my industry, I'm very well established. So I have a lot of network. So I'm just gonna reach out to people that I know that might make it easier, or maybe in some ways it would be more difficult. I have to choose carefully, but that also comforts me a little bit as well. Just utilizing the skills I've had in the past. I think that's the conclusion I'm coming to, is that I really have to utilize that, especially as an older guy, because I'm not learning as fast as these guys are. And then the other thing is to just doing pro bono, and then just networking, and then just learning, figuring out that I'm going to be continuing to learn, and it's not over. I don't have to get a job with technology that I have. I can continue to learn and build my skills, and that's also comforting to me as well.
Absolutely. And a big thing with what you're saying with the pro bono work, I think that works best with nonprofits, right? Because they are used to pro bono work. A lot of small businesses, it makes them uncomfortable. So you might hit someone up and be like, I'll make your website for free. And they'll respond, I can't make you do it for free, man. Like, what's like $100? Can I give you like, I don't know, lunch? Like they'll want to give you something in return. I was a marketer and I helped design someone's website, and it was a nonprofit, and they paid me, I think, like $1,000, and it all worked out, even though I learned I hate WordPress and I never want to do that job again. But that you like this stuff. I was still testing. This is like over a decade ago. So when you go out there, offer it for free, and then find out that some people are going to want to pay. And then keep in mind your commitments. Don't commit to like a 30-page website for free. You're going to drive yourself nuts. Do very, very small projects that you can get done in a couple of weeks, that you can then post on your portfolio and on your LinkedIn and whatnot, just to show that you're doing things. And you can always do a phase 2 and a phase 3 and a phase 4, but break it up so you don't get caught, for the next year doing free work for some company that keeps coming back to you with changes. All right. So I always say these things with caveats, and I always say be careful. And then the other piece is, I had a conversation with someone who started one of the first coding boot camps, and she was hilarious. She goes, at the end of the coding boot camp, what I would do for anyone who still didn't think that they were a developer, because most people kind of tie their identity up with the company that they work for. So I'm not a developer until a company pays me money to be a developer, right? My analogy here is, well, I hired myself to be a career coach. So whenever I'm not immediately coaching someone, like as soon as I hang up this call and I have a break, actually I don't break, I go straight into another talk. But as soon as that talk ends, I'm not getting paid for my time, right? I only get paid for the hours I work. Does that mean that in between coaching calls, I cease to be a coach because I don't have a client paying me for that hour? No, the coaching is my skill set. Being a job seeker isn't a thing. It's a non-identity. You don't solve problems as a job seeker. You just have problems as a job seeker. And that's why as soon as you start getting educated in a field and you start looking for a job in that field, in my mind, you work in that field, because everyone who works in that field had to get educated and had to get a job. And then we'll get laid off, and then we'll have to get a job again. So the time between, like, let's say last week I talked to a marketer who got laid off. Just because she got laid off and she's not senior VP of X company, does that mean that she's not still a marketer? No, she's a marketer because she thinks like a marketer. And so in between jobs, our career stays standing. So your career as a developer exists outside of the jobs that you have throughout your career. And so what I want us to do is, instead of going from I'm a job seeker, no identity, to I have a job, to someday I lose that job and I'm back to no identity, is to build your own identity as a developer. That way you always just fall back to you. So I say, when we're not working full time, we are working freelance. And when we're working freelance, we're building our own projects, volunteering for things, working small gigs here and there until we can get a full-time role again. And we leverage that ability. So what this person used to do is knight everyone at the end of their boot camp. She would literally, like the people that were most nervous, she'd say, get down on your knees. And she would pretend to knight them as developers. Be like, I now don you, developer, and like blah, blah, blah. I think it's hilarious. I would never do it, but it's hilarious. And so these are the things where it's like, own it yourself so that the company believes you, and also own it yourself so you can stay sane. And if you want to go as far as to build your own freelancer brand, I highly encourage it. If you have on your profile, whatever your last name, Young Software, right? Wesley, Young Software. And that's your personal brand that you always have on your resume in between jobs. You now have closed all your gaps in your resume. You now never have to worry about not having a job, because whenever you don't have a job, you are Young Software going out and getting your next gig. And that is part of the job. Learning how to get a job in your industry is part of being part of that industry. And that really brings us to these stories that we tell ourselves, right? Because that's really all I'm doing, is I'm reframing the stories that we're telling. The current story is, I'm not a developer yet. And the truth is, you are one, you just don't have a job yet. So how do we actually talk to ourselves, and how do we talk to other people? We want to tell better stories. How many people are going through this boot camp in order to get away from a career? Just raise your hand. A couple folks, what are you running from?
I was in college for pre-med, and I didn't want to do that anymore, so I came here.
Cool. And what'd you learn from pre-med? What'd you learn about yourself?
That I did not have the mental capabilities to do 12-hour shifts watching people suffer.
Damn, that's heavy. And so what is it about what was it that drew you into medicine in the first place?
It was mostly family pressure. Everyone in my family is basically somewhere related to the medicine profession. And I was just told from a young age, oh, you're going to be a PA. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be a PA. But I went through high school in a STEM, like nursing, medicine related pathway. Only colleges I applied to were medicine schools. Did that for a couple of years. I was like, nah, this ain't it.
Yeah, I can vouch, as an Indian in the family, everybody always wants to be a doctor or something like that all the time growing up.
Oh yeah, my old business partner is Indian. He had the same pressure, and us being entrepreneurs was a real tough one for his parents. So when it comes to coding, how did you discover that? How did you go from med to code?
I've always been a bit of a tech guy. I play a lot of computer games, so scripting and coding bots for that sometimes. I didn't really do that, but I had to download them and like type in a couple bits of code here and there. And over time, I enjoyed it a little bit more. So when I saw the opportunity to take a coding boot camp, I hopped on it.
Yeah, a booting code camp. Yeah. And so when when you look back at your medical training, what aspect of your medical training was enjoyable?
I really enjoyed the learning part of it. I've never been one to back away from a learning opportunity. While I was like my first few years, it was mostly just classes all day. But when I got to labs and stuff, that's when I really started to struggle. But just sitting down, listening to a lecturer talk for like 10 hours a day, I could absorb all that information. But when it came to applying it, I wasn't capable.
Okay. And what was your favorite stuff to learn? What were your favorite topics?
Chemistry.
What about chemistry?
It's like Sam said, chemistry is just like a giant puzzle that as you understand it becomes so simple, and the path from going to holy crap, how am I ever going to learn that, to being able to carry like a in-depth conversation about it. I just love that journey.
Cool.
So
And what is maybe like the most fun thing about chemistry? Like if you could tell me a story of something you did while studying chemistry that you worked on.
we turned a bunch of calcium into ibuprofen in one of my biochem labs. That was pretty fun. We weren't allowed to try it, of course, but it was still a fun process.
So you turned calcium into ibuprofen, and
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch of stuff, but calcium
yeah,
was one.
yeah. And so, what was like the key skill in doing that?
Precise mathematics, clean lab practices. I don't know.
Precision. Sweet.
Yeah.
So your typical story when talking about getting out of medicine and getting into coding would go something like this. I'll just hypothesize what the story might sound like if someone were to say, "Tell me about yourself," right? The typical story would be something like, well, I went into medicine because my family really thought that, it'd be good for me to be in medicine. But I realized it wasn't really for me. Like you said, it was a lot of human suffering and a lot of long shifts, and it wasn't really my thing. So I wanted to get into a more stable career, and I chose to get into coding because it's really fun and I like puzzles. Is that typically how you would say that?
No, but I can start.
No. I'm trying to give the typical example here. So
Yeah.
that sounds somewhat okay, right? Sounds somewhat okay, but it's missing a few key points. What people want to know isn't what we're leaving, but why. And so when we make any sort of career transition, the key thing they want to know is this person going to make another transition? Are they going to start working here and then disappear because they want to go explore acting next or something? I had someone who I was coaching, and he's like halfway through, his coding job search. He decided to go be a writer. I was like, whatever you want to do, man. I'm a coach. I'm here to support you. You make the decisions, but it's a lot of money you just spent. And what I would say here, if I were to give your pitch, so someone says, tell me about yourself, I would say, I started my education in the medical field, and I learned that I'm really interested in precision and technical aspects. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite things in the medical field was chemistry and this one project that we did where I was able to turn a bunch of different ingredients into ibuprofen. And you have to do it in a very specific way to make it right. And that taught me that I really enjoy being in the details and being really precise with the details, which lended itself to coding. One of my favorite things about coding is being able to go through an intense language that is incredibly complex and interesting to learn, and be able to make small tweaks that have huge impacts on people's businesses and put those puzzle pieces together. So I'm really excited to take everything that I've learned from my history in medicine and chemistry and coding and help you improve your business by being more precise with your online presence. And that ability to connect the past with the present and their future is really what we're trying to do here with our stories. When I lay that out for you, what are your thoughts?
That's definitely better than what I was going with before.
Anyone else have a story that you want to break down into pieces?
I'm curious. Nisarg is he's interested in more like a gaming and that kind of industry. Not I don't want to speak for him, but if he was to pitch himself towards that kind of company, like how would you, instead of using a website as a reference, how would he sound good to pitch himself?
So I'm definitely more ignorant than you guys about the back ends of all these things. So what I say might always come out a little bit dumber than what it is, but here's my thought on it. It could be something like, one thing that I really loved about chemistry was the fact that you could take a handful of ingredients and make a bunch of different medicines from it just by tweaking ratios and tweaking the, formulas. What I really love about gaming is the fact that we take a very standard set of principles, and then they can play out in different ways depending on the user's way of interfacing with that code. And I really like that you can build elements that people can interact with and get very different outcomes based on how they put them together. Now, that might be stupid. I don't know. I'm not the one behind the scenes building things, but it's an attempt to try and connect things from our past into what we want to do in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I mean, to me, the whole website thing really works, but I just was wondering,
Yeah,
how in other ways that you could apply your, your
100%. Like if I came on this call and I said, I used to be a marketer and I hated it, but now I'm a coach. So, hey, everyone, you'd be like, what's going on with this guy? But I integrate my marketing background into my coaching in order to explain how I approach things, because it's the same. The way we approach things doesn't really change, right? The way that we're interested in what we learn, and we're drawn to certain things and not to others. And then if we get into something like tell me your strengths and weaknesses, it starts to get really interesting with the stories that we tell. So we'll definitely dig into that a little bit. So your past paved the way for the present. And what I'm really curious about is how these previous roles got you here. So does anyone else have another example of what you did in the past and how, you don't have to connect it, but what did you do before? And, give me that. Sorry, talking too much today. What job did you do before the boot camp?
Yeah, I can give an example. Before this, well, I actually moved across the ocean, across continent. And before I was in finance. And here I was always drawn to working with data and creating dashboards, creating insights for the business so that we can utilize them to be help them in whatever way to connect to the needs of our customers. And one of the projects I did was like implementation of Power BI to get daily insights versus monthly insights. And I worked together with a consultant who did all the backend stuff, which was magic to me. He took all the data from the system, implemented it, and structured it so that I could actually build the dashboards. So now coming here, having a hard time with COVID, I decided to take this time to dive into what I really want and work better with data.
So you've basically got into a point that I don't have a whole lot to tweak, because that was really good. You talked about what you were doing and what you liked about it. That's the key thing that everyone forgets when they're telling their story. They always focus on what they didn't like and how I quit this job because I hated something or something like that. But you have a COVID thing that you're talking about. We don't even always have to mention the COVID piece. We can say, I was working in finance. I was doing a lot of things that I really enjoyed, creating these, visualizations and whatnot. I worked with consultants who knew code and was able to just basically do magic in front of me. And I wanted to learn how to do that magic. So I went to a coding boot camp to take my ability to analyze data to the next level. And I'm incredibly excited to talk to you about the data problems that you're trying to solve at your company and how I might be able to help.
All right. Well, that sounds slightly more tuned and sweet.
It's just tying it back. Yeah. It's just tying it back to the company, right?
Yeah.
And so, if I'm going to give my pitch, it's, I'm a career coach. I really love helping people with the emotional and promotional sides of the job search. And I'm really excited to talk with you today to see how I can help your students, or to see what your students are struggling with emotionally and promotionally, and see how I can help, right? You just tie it back in to their needs at the end. So this is why we focus on the industries, the companies. These things might change. We're not trying to pigeonhole ourselves, But in every conversation we're having, we're wondering, what problems do they have? What skills do I have? How can I communicate my ability to solve them? And then hit them with the excitement, you know, a nice smile. Anyone else want to give it a shot? We can move forward too. Anyone think they got one without needing it broken down? All right, I can read your faces. Next slide. So how do we talk about our studies? How do you talk about Coding Temple? What are you saying to people? I'm going to sit down while we get into this one. Do my awkward
Boot camp.
standing desk.
Yeah, I went to a boot camp to learn the ins and outs of data science and software development. And a means to further my career and and help your business.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate the effort there. That was great. You're damn right we're here to help their business. Yeah. Talk about the projects, not the experience. Everyone's talking about, I went to the boot camp. It was 17 weeks or whatever the heck it is, right? I did the things. I went to the classes. I studied this many hours. Whatever the thing is, no one cares, right? How many hours have I worked as a coach? Do you care? No, it's way too many. But yeah, no, you don't care. And so what we want to do is talk about the experiences we had and the projects we worked on. And this goes for your resumes and everything too. If I tell you that right now I work with a bunch of boot camps and I do coaching, you're like, okay, I get it. Cool. But if I tell you I sat down with someone who at the very beginning of the call took out their suicide note that they had written before joining a boot camp and shared part of it with me and talked to me about how this boot camp really helped them get their life back on track, and they're really excited but nervous in the job search. And I had to help them. That was the first call at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning with this person I'd ever had. Wasn't ready for it. And in that situation, I had to learn a few things: my limitations as a coach and my strengths as a coach. And I can tell you this whole story. It goes on and on. But basically what I learned about myself was creating good boundaries with clients is important. And number two, adjusting my coaching approach to the client is incredibly important. So what I did was I gave this person 3 options of how we can work together as coaches. I thanked them for sharing such vulnerable personal information. And I also made sure that we had a conversation about therapy and how important that is to pair with coaching if needed. And they thanked me for not trying to fix them. And they thanked me for giving them options so that they felt like they were in control of coaching, of this experience. That story probably caught you off guard when I started telling it, right? Caught your, it's different.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. And every time I tell it, I get a little like, ooh, this is a tough story to tell. And I don't always tell it. Sometimes I tell it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I tell the one about the person who went through a divorce. Sometimes I tell the story about the person who just didn't meet the requirements of coaching and lost coaching and cried on the phone and yelled at me and how I had to deal with that. But what I'm trying to communicate when I tell these stories in interviews is what I'm capable of dealing with so that the person I'm talking to knows I can handle whatever problems they throw at me. And we only show that by saying what we've been capable of up to this point. So if I ask you what your strengths and weaknesses are, what would you typically say?
Usually as a weakness, I say is that I have a overly excited way of looking for new stuff and new things to do without where I can lose track of how other people in my team feel or feel about it, like especially when it's about changing the way how they work or anything else that's related to their job.
So that's a good example of a high level answer where you didn't back it up with a story. So I get to fill in the gaps with my imagination, right? So imagine someone showed you, just think of the movie Signs. It was really scary until they showed the alien. And then you're like, oh, it's just some tall, weird, skinny thing. Great. When we when we don't fill in the details, people fill the details in with their imagination. That's why Jaws is great, Alien is great. When you said that, my brain went to, here's all the ways that this person's not going to tell me things while he's doing his work and how it might impact our workflow. I'm not sure if I want to hire this person. Right?
Fair.
Because the weakness you gave is fundamental to the job you're supposed to do. Now, I'm going to give you my example, what I say in interviews, and then I'm really curious to dig into each of yours. My example is I'll tell that story about, a divorcee or something like that, someone I've worked with who had a really hard emotional time. And what that's doing is it's low key telling them that I have emotional intelligence, or maybe not even low key, maybe it's very obvious, but it's inferring it, right? Instead of saying, I'm someone with really great emotional intelligence, and you all look at me and you roll your eyes and you say, yeah, right. I tell a story about a time that I utilized emotional intelligence on the fly when I wasn't ready to. And then they say, what are your weaknesses? Right? So emotional intelligence is my strength. And if they say, what's your strength? I'll say, well, remember that story earlier? Emotional intelligence, I think, is probably one of the things that I'm best at. And then they'll say, what's your weakness? And I'll say, honestly, data. I'm okay at inputting it and tracking it, but I can't analyze it and I can't infer things in the future from it. So I'm not a very good data analyst. So when I'm on a team, and I was actually on this one team once where my entire job was the data, and there were a lot of mistakes, and the spreadsheets had 10,000 lines, and it just was not the right place for me because I wanted to be talking to people and helping them with their emotions. And instead I was spending all my time redoing the spreadsheet again because I missed a line or something like that. So in this role, it's really important that I spend the majority of my time working with people, and I can input data and I can track data and I can do all the basics. I've made spreadsheets. I can do the basics. I can fill out HubSpot, but it's just not my strongest point. So it's better to pair up with like someone who's good at that stuff. And that's a confident way to just say, I'm not going to do that. And it's a confident way to say someone else should do that and you shouldn't give it to me. Because I've been on teams where I didn't say that and they gave me the data work and no one was happy. Right? So what my curiosity is for all of you is, what are the topics you've studied or the skills you've had to use in a job that if you had your choice, let's do an 80-20 split. If you had your choice, 80% of your job would be spent doing what? And 20% of your job would be spent doing what? Or if you could eliminate it completely, what would you eliminate? Like if I could eliminate tracking, I would. I don't because it's necessary. But if I could, I would. It'd be amazing. I'd be a talk show host or something. But for you, what is the 80-20 split? What do you want to spend 80% of your time on? That should be your strength. What do you want to spend 20% of your time on? That should be your weakness. And then we can find stories to back it up rather than just saying, I procrastinate, which everyone does, which means nothing.
For me, I would like to 100% remove any front end work. I'm just not great at visualizing how something should look, but I can make the clocks tick. I don't know how to make a clock look good.
I can make the clocks tick, but I'm not going to design the exterior of the clock. That's perfect. That's a perfect way to say your strengths and weaknesses. And that's a good thing because they probably already have front end people that are doing that. And they don't want someone who can do both. Or if they do, you don't want that job because you're going to be upset. And so that's awesome. I think that's a perfect breakdown. And you can say, you know, I'm capable of doing basic front end work, but it's really good to be paired up with a front end person so that I can support them rather than be the one that drives that, because it's just not my forte. However, if you want really complex back-end data analysis and so on and so forth, the tracking and automation and all these other things, I'm your guy. And that's how you can differentiate from other people in the room who won't commit, who won't say that I don't want to do a thing, right? And so does that seem to be one that everyone resonated with? But does anyone have another example that you want to share?
I think everyone hates front end.
Fair enough. Can you give me an example of a time that you were really excited about the back end and an example of a time that you were not so stoked about doing front end?
We recently did a Flask project where we made an e-commerce application from scratch. I really love the connecting the ORM to our database, or connecting the ORM database to our project. I really love making all the routes and understanding how everything worked. And then when we got to the front end, working with Bootstrap and CSS and HTML, I just wanted to end the call and go home.
I love that. Maybe not so blunt in an interview, although, hey, humor goes a long way. I've seen people be very blunt and still do great because they know how to communicate it, and you did a good job there. But I will say, like, that's great. If you're applying for back-end roles, obviously, if it's a split back-end front-end role, maybe this isn't the route we go. But if it is a back-end role, or it's a back-end role that just needs a basic front-end knowledge, you can say that. I built an e-commerce app. I absolutely loved the ORM. I loved connecting all these dots. I really got excited back there doing all those things. Then we switched to the front end, and I was able to do it, but I can tell you, if you had a real front end person on that project, it would have been a lot better. And so those are my strengths and weaknesses. I would love to be working on all the hyper technical stuff and partnered up with someone on your team who can really take care of the aesthetics. That's perfectly fine to say. And this is how you end up in roles that you want, because people go, wow, this person's self-aware. This person is confident. This person's not trying to BS me, which is a big one, right? And the tone of your stories and of your interviews matters a lot. And I think one more example I'll give on that is, has anyone been asked about a time that you've had a conflict with a coworker in an interview? Seeing a few nods.
Yep.
If we don't practice this answer ahead of time, you're going to get transported back to the time that Karen made you so upset, and that emotion is going to resurge. And like the other day, I was in therapy and I was talking to the therapist, and they're like, why did this thing bother you? And I was like, I know it's such a small thing that bothered me, but growing up, my brother always did X, Y, and Z. And this one time he put a knife in the dishwasher and it sliced me, and he made me feel like an idiot. And I just went on, I was like, wow, I'm furious right now, right? And that happened like a decade ago. We can't transport ourselves back to a bad story in an interview. In therapy, it's fine. But in an interview, oh boy, we don't want to go from, I'm Mr. Positive, going to help your company grow, to, hey, Karen, right? Like, that's not where we want to end up here. So one of the reasons we're talking about stories is because we want to write them down, practice them, and make them so boring to us that it's almost like we're talking about someone else. Again, think about how comedians craft a joke. It seems like it's the first time they're telling you that story, but they've definitely practiced it before. And a lot of the stories I'm telling you here today, I've practiced before. The therapy one, I haven't actually. That's a brand new one, but I'm going to get better at telling it. And 10 conversations from now, it'll be much more fluid and I won't get worked up as much. But that's what we do. We practice and we practice and we write them down and we listen to them, so that when we're in the interview, we don't wait for the question, because our stories can answer dozens of questions, right? The story of the time that I had a conflict with a coworker could also be the time that I'm most proud of an interaction I had at work or a project I worked on, right? The time that I showed leadership might be the same project that I had a conflict on. I showed leadership on this project when I was doing this part of it. I had a conflict on this part of the project. I had a success on this part of the project, and I had a failure on this part of the project. And that project could be split up into 4 stories that you could tell throughout an interview. And that way you only need a handful of stories. You don't need to come up with a brand new story for every single question. You can say, this question they're asking me can probably tie to this. And you can almost chunk them out, right? For these 10 questions, I'm going to tell this story from a different perspective. And that's how I'm able to say, like, tell me about a time that, you had a struggle with a client. Well, the time that I had a struggle with the client was when they cried. But that was also the time that I learned my limitations as a coach, which is another question I've been asked. And like those 2 questions, same story, slightly different perspective on it. We're doing great in the interview still. I went real deep on that one. And so here's what makes a good story. You set it up like the STAR method, if anyone's heard of that. You set up the situation. You tell them what the problem was. You talk about how you approached solving it and what your outcomes were. So without the proper context, a story can fall flat. And I'm sure I screw this up all the time, but we try, right? We're not writing, South Park here, but we try. So there's an introduction to what's happening. So tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. If all we say is, well, this one time I had a conflict with a coworker, but don't worry, we worked it out and everything was fine. They're going to be like, I have no idea what happened in that story. You're just trying to avoid it. So what I have to say is, well, I was working on this project. So I was working on a project trying to implement an e-commerce site for this company or for this project, whatever it was. I was put on a team with 4 other people, and we had a few differing opinions on how to approach solving the problem. The problem was, how do we integrate this in a way that pulls in data properly? One person thought it would be good to pull in data this way. One person thought it'd be good to pull in data this way. I'm making this up, so bear with me. Well, me and this other person, let's call them Jared. You can make up a fake name if you really don't want to put someone on blast. Jared really wanted to do X, or really got caught up in the aesthetics. And I really wanted to focus on the efficiency. And so we had a conflict. And what we had to do was basically put together our arguments, bring the team together, present it to other people to get a consensus, and then move forward. That way it wasn't a fight. It was a, democratic system almost to make a decision. And what I found out from that, and this is really the key to telling a good story in an interview, is you talk about what you learned and how it will apply in the future. So what I learned from that experience is that when I do have a conflict with another person on my team, when we differ in our opinion on how to approach things, it's important to bring in other voices and not just get caught up in our egos, because that way we can move forward without, people getting upset with each other. And that's how I kind of solve problems now. I try and bring in other voices, and I say, hey, can we get a consensus on this rather than just butting heads? And I'm excited to hear about the types of things you're trying to build and see, how I might be able to fit in with your teams as well. Or you can say, I'm curious what kinds of, things you have in your organization, or how you typically solve problems within your organization. If you typically bring in bosses or other things, you can make a conversation out of it. You don't have to, but you could. So I'm going to pause there because I know that that's kind of a lot. And I'm going to just, has anyone done this sort of STAR method, story arc stuff before? Kinda, no, not really.
I did an ELA in high school. I remember this roller coaster chart.
Yeah, it's pretty old school, right? It's really, there's a lot of different ways to do it. The story arc is one. STAR method is perfectly fine. The only thing with STAR method is that it kind of forgets to tie it back to the company. So situation, the problem, I'm not using the actual STAR, but you set the tone, you talk about the problem, you talk about your approach, you talk about your outcome. And then you say, and what I learned from that is going to help me in this role. That's the key thing that's missing a lot in our stories. We just go, I had a fight with a coworker and we resolved it. And then there's dead silence in the interview. We have to say, I resolved it, and now I know how to act on a team better, or now I know how to approach this on a team better. So this is the general idea of what makes a good story and how you can better pitch yourself. And in order to stop rambling, which if today's any indication, I'm not doing a great job of not rambling, but the way that we stop rambling is that we focus on very specific stories one at a time. If you're asked one question, give one answer. So if they say, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker, you talk about one conflict. If they say, tell me about a time that you showed leadership, one leadership story. Sometimes we try and say too much, and we forget that we can save these stories for other questions.
But you also want to say enough, because otherwise people like, what I just really noticed in like this story you like say is like, if you avoid answering like a conflict with a coworker, you're like, oh, that probably was like a horrible conflict that he didn't come out like, right? So maybe not.
Yeah, you definitely need to say enough. That's 100% true. And when we say enough, I would just use the STAR method. Did you set it up? Did you explain the problem? Did you explain your approach to solving it? Did you give a resolution? And did you talk about what you learned? If you do all those things, you've probably told a story well, and it's hard to do on the fly. So practice it before you get to the interview. And I highly recommend basically downloading a list of interview questions, telling stories in your answers rather than just kind of talking high level, and then put headphones in and record it and listen to yourself rather than talking into a mirror, because hearing ourselves when we're not talking really helps us understand where we're going off the rails. You know, I do a podcast and I do a live stream every day. Hearing myself on the live stream, it's not fun. I don't enjoy listening to myself when I'm not talking. I enjoy listening to myself while I am talking, but when I'm not talking, I hate hearing myself. But here's the thing: when you go back, it's like a football player watching the tape. You see where the mistakes were much more clearly, and that's what we're trying to do here.
I have a question for how to talk about our leadership, leadership experience. In all of my past jobs, none of them related to coding, I've always been the youngest person or like the newest, and even in like this class or in like other things I've done. So I've never really gotten like on job experience, anything leadership related. But I've been to a couple of interviews and they always ask that. Like I've always just fabricated up some random story, but I don't know how to properly approach that.
Maybe we need to expand what leadership is in your definitions. I think what it sounds like is I wasn't assigned a leadership role, so I wasn't a leader. They're looking for potential, not for practice necessarily. So we can say, while I've never been in a official leadership role, one time that I showed leadership was blank. A good example of this, I had someone recently practicing this, and he said, on this one project, I noticed that my boss had a lot of tasks that she needed to do, and she was in meetings all day, every day. Like her entire job was just meeting, meeting, meeting. And I realized while I was watching her run back and forth to all these meetings that the project was going to get delayed because she was never able to get her work done without having to work nights and weekends. So I reached out to her and I said, hey, I would happily take over some of these tasks for you so that you can focus on your meetings. Would you be okay with that? And the boss went, yes, please, thank you. And we were able to keep the project on track. And I feel like that really showed leadership in that moment because I was able to see an opportunity, step up and help. So if there's anything that you've, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to point out that like we saw a lot of leadership skills in this arc, like during the class. And one of the thing was, I'm sorry, I don't want to take over, but just wanted to point out one thing is that like when there was that NASA project thing, you know, you like kind of invited everybody to do it. It was just a very natural way of doing it. It wasn't like, you know, like gun ho, like, oh, we should do this or anything like that, but it was a very natural way to lead a group. You know, it's and you showed a lot of that in the class, I think. So I think you have a lot of it, and you already using a lot of the skills.
I love that. Write down that story. Write down that example that he just gave of, I'm going to talk about this project. And then, yeah, we're going to have to deal with some of the awkwardness that comes with other people giving us compliments. I can see it on your face. But that's good. We want to go ask people. Like, you're in a wonderful position of having worked with a bunch of people who are also going through the job search. So help each other. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ken. Like, that is huge to be able to pull that. Like, you know, it's always better to say, well, I was told by my manager or by a coworker or by someone on my project that I showed leadership in this situation, than feeling like we're bragging. It's okay to quote someone. You know, I'll say sometimes, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Well, according to my old manager, my strengths are creativity and my weaknesses are data. So, you know, sometimes I'll take it off my own opinions and put it onto someone else, or I'll take a personality test and I'll quote that. According to my personality test, I'm really good at these things and I'm not so great at these things, right? So feel free to leverage all that stuff. And it's great that you're sharing. Thank you so much. The next thing here is we want to order our stories around their questions and the keywords. We don't have to be chronological with everything. So when they ask you a question, there's two questions that they're asking you. The first one is the actual question. Tell me a strength or weakness, or tell me a conflict with a coworker. And the second question they're asking is subconscious. It's whatever they infer from your answer. Like I said, if I told you I'm emotionally intelligent, it sounds pretentious and you don't believe me. If I tell you a story about something that I've dealt with, you will infer that I have good EI without me even saying it. So it's not good to say I'm a team player. I love to solve puzzles. I love all these, like, I do all these things. I am all these things. We want to showcase a project that infers that we are problem solvers. That every single developer I talk to says, I love to solve problems. And then I say, what problems? And they draw a blank. None of them can answer that. So if you can't say what problems you solve, then you don't enjoy solving problems, or at least you haven't thought hard enough about it. And that's the thing that we're trying to figure out here is, how do I stop saying platitudes and start talking realistically about my work and how it helps? And again, if I came in and I was just like, hey, everyone, I'm like the most chill guy, and then I yell at you, you're going to be like, this guy's not chill, right? But if I just act how I act, you know, I've been told I'm somewhat chill. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. It depends on the day. So we want to focus, make sure we stick on point, and, you know, look up keywords that you want to include in your stories as well. You know, there's certain buzzwords that people want to hear. Don't go crazy with it, but keep it in mind. And these stories become the basis of our pitch, our LinkedIn summary, our interview answers, and so much more. So we're going to be using these stories all the time. Here's a few questions to help you find stories. Write these down, go home and come up with a few answers. What was your favorite project that you ever worked on? Or your favorite 3? What problems did you solve? What skills did you use? And what outcomes did you get in this project? If you can identify all those things, your stories are going to be really easy to answer. Or to tell, sorry. All right. Screenshot, grab it. There we go. All right. I know we're going to run a little short on time here, but now we're going to get into the pitch here. A pitch is just a simplified version of your stories used to communicate your value to employers as quickly as possible. Here's how I typically like to structure it. I like to say what I'm doing today, how I got here, and how it helps. So I'm doing this, my past led me here, and I'm excited to help you do these things with my skills. And we connect the dots that way. We've talked through a lot of these pieces, but basically, you know, I'm currently a developer. My past is in medicine and chemistry, which taught me that I really love the back end and detail and all these cool things. And I'm really excited to talk with you about the complex stuff that's going on behind your website to make sure that we have it running as smoothly as possible for your customers. And the best way to transition between ideas is to talk about what you learned. Rather than saying, I did this and I didn't like it, so then I did this and I didn't like it, so now I do this and I sure hope I like it. We say, I did this and it taught me this about myself. So then I made this decision and it led me down this path and that taught me this about myself. And now I'm here doing these things because of what I've learned about myself, and I'm so excited to help you with your business. So I worked in marketing and I learned that data was not my thing. So then I moved into creative advertising and I learned that that's fun, but I worked in data marketing, analytical marketing, which taught me that I wanted to be closer to the creative side. Then I worked in the creative side, which taught me that I wanted to be closer to the consumer because I was still too many steps away. And then I ended up being a coach, which is all those same skills, but one-to-one. So it's natural evolution to my current role versus a total departure. So think about what you learned that led you to this decision rather than what you learned that you didn't like. Learned what you did. Lean into the things that you liked and went to seek out more. So again, it's at 80-20. 80% of my job was data, 20% was customer focused creativity. So then I moved to a role that was 80% customer creativity, but only 20% customer interaction. So then I moved to a role that's 80% customer interaction. And now I have a little bit of the data back. So that's kind of how we continue to evolve in the story. And here's how we make it short. So this is the rubber hits the road. You've listened to me talk all day here. Now I want you to put it into practice. Merging a background in this role and this role. I help companies solve these problems and get these outcomes. I'll give you an example. Merging a background in customer service and web development, I help companies create amazing experiences for their users across the web. So let's just input it for you. Do it choppy. Doesn't have to be perfect. Input your previous work and your current work. Talk about a problem that you solve or a general problem that you solve and the types of outcomes it gets for a company. You don't have to be perfect. If anyone wants to try and give it a shot on the call, I think that's always fun.
I could try it.
Cool.
Merging a background in restaurant operations, I help companies solve what's that?
So let me jump in. Merging a background in operations and web development. I help companies.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, operations and what was that other word?
And web development.
And web development. I help companies solve frustrated customer experience with seamless user experience.
Sweet. We got to tweak it, but that was an amazing first start. So write it down and then write it down again and then get it to a point where you're really happy with it. Don't feel limited by this template. It is a template. Templates are always limiting, but use it as a guidepost. So the way I typically say it is merging a background in marketing and professional development. I help education organizations improve outcomes through career coaching. So it's not perfectly aligned with the template, but do you kind of get what I'm saying there? Like, it's clearly stating the value I provide and the way that I got here, all in one sentence. So this is kind of the ideal to get to, something so simple you could put it on the top of your resume. And then from there, you can expand it outward. You can add more detail, put in more, story around it, break it into the past, present, future, present, past, future, whatever you want to do. And you can build it from there. And here's the example again, if anyone wants it. Merging a background in customer service and web development, help companies create amazing experiences for their users across the web. All right. And we're a little short on time there. But where you're going to use it is you'll put it on your LinkedIn, in your about, on your resume summary, and you'll also use it as the baseline for how you answer tell me about yourself in interviews. And that right there is the end of our presentation. And we got 2 minutes for questions. I know I threw a lot at you over the past couple hours. So I'm going to pause. What is on your mind? What could you use a little more clarity around?
I have like a more personal one.
Mm-hmm.
When to think about the weakness, I was thinking like mine sounds like it would be pertinent to programming, so
yeah.
It's kind of strange, but it would be like the details. I like building the framework for the operations, but the details I generally like to manage. So that's, and by doing that, I like to control the seamlessness of the operation itself and the guest or the customer user experience. So
how much of your job is based on that?
Before?
No. How much of the next job is going to need that skill?
Next job?
Yeah.
Well, starting out, it's going to be, I'm actually interested in freelancing or building my own company eventually. So in time, it won't be a lot, but at the beginning, it would be a lot of that, which I know I love building things. So it's not like a real huge issue, but if at the beginning, I would like to see if I could work for someone too, so that I could get some experience.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know how to approach that.
Think about it this way. There's more, we all have more than one strength and weakness. So we get to pick and choose which ones we share and which ones we want to talk about, right? I mean, one of my weaknesses is I have insomnia, but like talking about an interview is weird. So I don't say it. So we don't have to say every weakness, and we don't have to say the main point of that question. Like I said, there's a part 1 and part 2 of every question. Part 1 is literally, can you give me an answer? Like, just to make sure you're a functioning human being. Number 2, what am I going to assume about you based on your answer? And a good example of this is at the end of an interview, they say, what questions do you have for me? And people who are inexperienced will say things like, what are the vacation days? What's the culture like? Will I get a mentor? Will you pay for my learning? All these things that don't matter because you haven't been offered the job. What we need to be doing, so the main thing with all those questions, what you're signaling to the interviewer is all you care about are the things that benefit you. What we want to do is ask questions like, what attributes do your top performers have that you're looking for in this new hire? What are the metrics that I'm going to be measured on? And how often will we be measured? What are your expectations 30, 60, 90 days out? What can I start learning before I start so that I can be ready to go on day 1? These questions will give you good information, but more importantly than the information they give you is the tone you set, which is I care about performance, I care about knowing your expectations, and I care about being ready to go on day 1. I care about that more than the culture, and I care about that more than the vacations. And so the same thing with your strengths and weaknesses question. Do you care mostly about letting them know exactly what you're most insecure about? Or do you care about communicating to them something that they can use in the hiring process? That's why I say I'm not good at data, even though it might lose me a job, because they'll be like, well, he's not going to be very good at tracking student progress and coming up with future projected plans. Good. I've had that job. It's horrible. So I tell them that because I want to make sure I don't get put in a position where I'm creating predictive spreadsheets again. So my question to you is, does your answer help them hire you for the job you want? And if it does, that's great. If it doesn't, we need to tweak something. Because I could also say, as one of my weaknesses, I tend to overbook myself with client calls and I burn out. I tend to sometimes work 60, 70-hour weeks and I burn out. If I say that, they're going to go, this is an unreliable coach and we don't want to hire him. Am I working on that? Yes, every day. And I've actually got a pretty good system down, and I could tell them that if I really wanted to, but maybe not in the first interview with them. Maybe once they get to know me and I can go, oh my God, every coach deals with burnout, right? Oh my God. Yeah. I talk about it on my live stream. Yay. And like, that's a totally different conversation. That's a lot more fun versus a very serious, what's my weakness, right? So these are the kinds of things where we can start realizing how we're being perceived as we're answering these questions. So I think what you shared is perfectly fine as long as you find the right way to say it, or you're saying it to the right types of jobs. I hope that was helpful.
Love it. Love it.
Cool. All right. And with that, go ahead.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I want to know, will we have access to this recording?
So I need to talk with Coding Temple about that. I haven't recorded any of them up to this point, and I kept regretting it. So I recorded this one for my own personal, watch my own tape, get better, right? And I'll let him know I recorded it and see if he wants to do anything with it. If he allows me to post it, then of course it's public, but I have a feeling, there might be some concerns around that. But yeah, I have the recording here, so I'd love to get it to you if I can.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
That would be great. And you said you have a podcast?
Yeah. I have a podcast called Career Therapy, and I do a daily live stream at 8 a.m. every day for a half hour on LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you need daily accountability and a place to vent, that's usually what that's for. I drink my brown liquid drugs every day on that.
Good for you.
It's been a pleasure, everyone.
Cool. Thank you for the brain food.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm always accessible, so just hit me up. It's actually careertherapy.com now, and let me know if you run into issues. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you.
Cool.
I've done a lot of this type things, and this was one of the best ones for sure.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers.